parents address the concerns they bring to us, recognizing that there are so many changes needed to be even more effective than we are. Well, I think centrally there has to be someone who is expert on the change recommended, who's thought it through, has a vision that is effectively communicated to others, and gently yet powerfully persuasive. We have that person with us tonight. David Willis is just the right person to talk to us about the power of this moment, how safe, stable, and nurturing relationships are at the very heart of human well-being, hiding in plain sight. Dr. Willis is a board certified developmental and behavioral pediatrician whose career has spanned decades of clinical care, where not surprisingly, he focused on early childhood development and family therapy. He then served as a director of the Division of Home Visiting and Early Childhood Services at HRSA and for 6 years, and then served as the initial as executive director of the Perigee Fund in Seattle. He's currently a senior fellow with the Center for the Study of Social Policy, where he leads a national initiative to advance early relational health for child health and communities. He's the co-chair of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine Forum on Children's Wellbeing, and also on the board of the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, serving as our treasurer. How fortunate we are, David, to learn from someone who's not only practiced what he will be teaching us, but is truly the person leading these efforts across the country. There is a lot of power in this moment.
Marianne, well, thank you. First of all, I love working and being close to the chapter, working closely with all of you that are touching families' daily lives. You know, if you get too far away from the real life practice of day by day serving families, you can become a little disconnected. And I feel my opportunity to partner deep with the chapter, partnering with the Pierce County work, partnering with, you know, the early childhood community is really a gift to me. And I'm really thankful to be a part of it. So I want to share with you, let me pull my slides up in the traditional way we do that, sharing slides, opening the door, and I plan to talk for about maybe 30, 35 minutes about the journey. And most importantly, then let's open it up for a conversation, because that's where the power is of the moment, of sharing together, learning together. And we start with the reality that the power of human connections. And we all know it. We know it ever more now during the experience of COVID. And we're knowing it ever more from the science that is calling us to really think about the way we help the development of young children. And it all happens in relationships. And it's very clear, we know, one human relationship can help weather adversity and protect the youngest from harm. All of the mitigating toxic stress is about surrounding those that have been vulnerable by the strength of relationship healing and recovery. Power of human relationships is actually deeply human and actually simple. It's in those simple interactions of connection, eye contact, shared feelings, shared moments of being, and the like. And nobody's perfect in this business. In fact, more and more of the research is showing that it is in the imperfections and the recovery of relationship connections where the power of growth, maturity, and maturation takes place. So that's the space that we're talking about. But we know we're in really hard times. And you may be aware of the national survey work going on previously at University of Oregon, now down at Stanford with Phil Fisher. There's actually continuing surveying a representative sample of young families that have children under 5 in terms of their experience over time and what they're saying. And we all know, you all know, because of your daily practices, parental well-being has been a challenge. And similarly, when parents are struggling, their children similarly are also struggling over time. We all know that the material hardships and that yellow line on the left is when it was that hardship got easier because of the cash transfers. All of the data about child cash transfer demonstrates improvement of well-being in families until it was pulled away and the stress returned in families again. And we also know that as the number of hardships that families talk about go up, the children react and become more and more influenced by the challenges around them. We all living a mental health crisis. And the question one always has to ask is how do we prevent the next mental health crisis? How do we heal the current one? Everything's relationally centric. And if we're going to really look at building human well-being and countering the adversity of the moment, it is deeply about recapturing relationship power, those critical relationship moments, and making certain that the next generation of young children and families are surrounded with relational care, comfort, recovery, and the like. I've recently been influenced by the book by Priya Parker called The Art of Gathering. And she makes a statement that really jumps out to me. And that is, gatherings shape culture. And you're all gathering, thinking together around this space. You gathered at the chapter retreat a couple of weeks ago. The gathering of people has power and shapes the way you think, the way you be, and the way things move forward. And that's what we're doing as a part of this kind of movement. All of us grew up with this core story that Jack Shonkoff made visible for the National Scientific Council about the core story of child development. We all embraced it. We built it from what we knew about toxic stress and all that's built. And that last core story element, children develop in the environment of relationship, is what is always both sung to me, but raised the question, and what is that environment of relationship? And how do we harness its strength? And if you follow the research in that space, we know that the positive experiences against adversity build resiliency. And the movement is now moving far beyond thinking about what's happened to you to about what are the positive experiences that can counter adversity, capturing the health outcomes of positive experiences with relationships, safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments, connectedness, and a real intention about being relationally connected. And the work from Jack's works moved ever further into really thinking about resiliency and resiliency building. And if you haven't had a chance, if you're interested in this space of resiliency and building brains to resiliency, the work of the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, you can go online and look at the Alberta Family Wellness, has taken all of Jack's work and translated the resiliency knowledge into the recognition that resiliency is built by maintaining the focus on positive supporting relationships to balance against stress. And that's where resiliency lies. The positive, safe, stable, and nurturing relationships counterbalance negative experiences all throughout life. That's what holds resiliency in place. Those concepts are really important in all of our thinking. But I want to add another element, and that is, and relationships matter. Back to Jack's concept that human development happens in the center of relationships, and relational experiences are healing and protective. Well, let's dig in deeper as to what are the mechanisms, what are the processes of that. And hence we began through the work of a number of people, captured actually back at the AAP when the Early Brain and Child Development Task Force was built. Colleen Kraft, who was a member of that small planning table, said, well, you know, relationships are vital signs in pediatrics. It's like there has to be a focus on relational health. That became a sticky idea. And a sticky idea, thank you, Malcolm Gladwell, is the sense that when you say the word early relational health, you're combining two disparate Western culture concepts. One, health is viewed as the individual, but then you're saying relationships. And you put those two words together and it creates a bit of an internal dissonance that captures your attention. And we found that the wording itself, early relationship, although it was built upon the knowledge of infant mental health, out of child psychology, everything we know, but it has a sticky word and it counters some of the stigma that infant mental health has had in terms of really making visible that relationships really matter. It also has activated, from what we now know, is health outcomes, social emotional outcomes, education outcomes, well-being and health come as a result of the relational experiences or not. Relationships are actually the driver, and the positive, safe, and stable nurturing relationships are the driver of building well-being and thereby needs elevation. So that's what the movement has been about. And what you're seeing in front of you is a definition that has been built from what we did with frameworks to discover the framing of early relational health. Then we've been working with Health Plus Studios, who's a communication firm, and we've gone about a business of engaging deep family voice and experience to help shape a meaningful definition that captures the science, but also is meaningful to what families understand. So what you see in front of you as a definition is really compatible with family understanding about why relationships matter, but consistent with the science itself. So that's like hot off the press for you. And the other element of relational health is that it's bidirectional. The newest science makes clear that parents grow with children. Actually, infant connections with young moms have power in the mother's brains. And there's healing forces that go on in the dyadic experience that's hormonally driven and relationally driven. And if you put another positive supportive caregiver around young women, fathers, and mothers with their young babies that are promotive and supportive, there's healing and growth beyond adversity. So that sense of the two-generational power of relational health is what we're also focused on. But recognize that relationships are always in the context of the environment. So you can't talk about the relational health without being simultaneously being aware of the context around relationships that either support them or counter them. Hence, poverty, racism, trauma, isolation, maternal depression, paternal depression, environments that are not safe, disrupt the ability of the relationships to have strength. So when we talk about relational health, it's not just the nature of the individuals, it's all the context of the environments within which they live. That's the space that we're in. Now, I will share with you at the end the core story we've developed about early relational health that again pencils in the values that it has for families, which we've been deeply participating with in helping shape our work and our story. I'll bring that back to you. But if we think about relational health, you see it every day in your practices, thinking dyadically in what you see and what it looks like. For example.
Uh-oh.
15 seconds. In 15 seconds, when you were witness to that relational experience, you felt something internally, first. Secondly, you probably started ticking through in your own mind, what am I witnessing? What are the elements that tells me what I'm feeling is telling me this relationship has strength? Capturing the observational patterns in the relational space is what's now challenging our good work in pediatrics to harness the knowledge that we know dyadically and what are the objective measures that tell us that this relational pattern is strong or this relational pattern needs some support. What you witnessed quickly, positive affect, eye contact, mutuality, affected vocalization, and turn taking. Those are observable patterns of what we call emotional connection in every dyadic parent, or its weakness that has, unfortunately, at times negative influences on moving and development, which we can talk more about over time. That's captured in the work that is at the Nurture Science Center at Columbia, talking about the observational patterns of those elements that are observable as traits of the interactive pattern that are observable in our well-child visits. And we're harnessing that work and that thinking into the work we're doing with the Reach Out and Read networks that you can hear more about. Relational health develops. One can watch the patterns of relational developmental sequences over time. This is the work of Stan Greenspan. This is the work that's been captured in the DIR model of the autism treatment efforts and in early intervention. This is the ability to look at the dyadic patterns of relational development that are sequential, predictable, observable, measurable, and when elements of the relational health sequence are missing, it can alert to you a problem. For example, even though we use the screen for autism spectrum, the MCHAT, which is usually we say 18 months and 24, one can observe failures of initiation at 6, 7, and 8 months of age in the relational space, which is a signal. All of the work that's looked at, first birthday videos of babies of siblings who have autism, all that work says very early one can begin to see relational patterns, social emotional pattern weaknesses. And when one takes a relational frame to human development in your observational patterns, you can spot where the influence of depression on the relational pattern at 4 months, 5 months of age. You can see how trauma histories and struggles of early development can disrupt that emotional connection we were talking about. That's observable. We can see where it is that there's not enough practiced imitation and interactive patterns that disrupt the developmental patterns sequentially. That's where the science is of human development, and that's moving to be that paradigm shift that we're talking about in early relational health. The other thing that's shocking to me as a developmentalist and watching the science is the degree with which the physiology of the neurobiology of attachment is showing just incredible physiological patterns dyadically. Every human system of development has a dyadic synchronous developmental pattern. So everything from what we observe at the macro level behaviorally, like we're looking at, but if you look at a microdissection of videos looking at, really a slowed down processes of synchrony, one can see the amazing dance that goes on in that attachment relational pattern. The autonomic nervous system gets attuned by the synchrony of eye contact, and engagement synchronizes the sympathetic parasympathetic gate and sets the tone for the regulation of the autonomic nervous system under the polyvagal theory. The endocrine systems become engaged and aligned. The cortisol system of a caregiver creates the synchronous development of the diurnal cycle of cortisol in the child, as do the neurohormones. The synchronous physiological development that goes on in these relational patterns is striking, important, and the science is ever more pointing to why we need to be relational. I've also been excited this past year because we've got a lot of papers coming out that are leaning in, not the least of which is some we're proud of ourselves, because what the heck. But the work of Andrew Garner, the policy statement that's just come out, I'll comment on in a minute, but the Infant Mental Health Journal in May was a special section of 7 different papers of colleagues that have been working in this relational health space. And then the 0 to 3 journal just last week came out with a paper across the 0 to 3 network about the paradigm shift in early relational health. This is alive and well. And the policy statement out of the AAP, its first paragraph says, and I quote, focusing on safe, stable, and nurturing relationships that buffer adversity and build resilience. And Andy says that's 2 sides of the same coin. Pediatric care is on the cusp of the paradigm shift, reprioritizing the way we do clinical activities, rewriting the kind of research activities that we're doing, and aligning our advocacy. Jill Sells will know this began way back when we were pushed hard to get the Early Brain and Child Development Initiative moving in the AAP. That generated the Early Brain and Child Development Task Force, which generated the Early Brain and Child Development Initiative through the AAP, and then through all the churning that goes on in the AAP to get a policy statement out was really dramatic. 15 years is really shocking. But as we speak, we're beginning dialoguing about how the next edition of Bright Futures, we're working to get the focus to be on relational health. We're also working as we speak to, we have now approval with the National Academy of Sciences to start seeking the dollars to create a consensus study about early relational health, like the Neurons to Neighborhood report. We're moving this agenda about the importance of redefining and aligning this kind of work. But relational health work is already in action. It's moving. So, what the chapter's been doing about the importance of promoting first relationships, pediatrics, what you've been doing about your high-performing medical homes, and now the excitement of co-locating community health workers within, and the movement that's been happening in Washington State with health system redesign and being team-based care, and now engaging parent voice and parent leadership and and the anti-racist movement and the equity movement. This is all a relationally focused effort and of great excitement and great activities. Washington's in the lead in many things. We've all got a lot of work to do, but it's being recognized. And the Pierce County's work and the collaborative care model and the community health worker advancement work and the degree with which mental health consultation services are being built, and the parent support, the maternal depression support efforts. There's a lot of good work that's focusing upstream relationally in terms of redefining, reorganizing, restructuring the way we work together. And increasingly, there's a focus on bringing to our rescue and to the family's rescue an expanded community health worker, expanded relational health workforce, that we increasingly need to look at how do we connect our medical home with community and with navigators, community health workers, doulas, promotores, and the like, to actualize the sense that those social those connections are how we begin to mitigate the vulnerabilities from isolation, the connecting points to counter the otherwise social determinants, and the strengthening of using relational forces in healing. That's what's moving, and that's what's really exciting. Ever more as I get older, the more I feel a sense of urgency, and I think we all feel it right now. You know, every day, every week, every month, every year, it's a new cohort of babies born. And if you follow the well-being data of the well-being of the children in our nation, it's terrible. You know, when you have 1 in 5 children with mental health diagnoses, right? Those develop. And I would argue they develop because the relational health experiences are weak. Secondly, we have the epidemic of failed school readiness. Those are, again, relational failures of support and encouragement. And these are, we know what to do to mitigate these changes. There's an urgency. And the more we can mobilize our communities and our partners and our colleagues locally to surround and support relationally new families with new babies born. And we focus on the strengths that exist in every family and mitigating the forces that make and disrupt those relational patterns. We've really got to make a change happen for the next generation of well-being. So I think constantly, generationally, and that's the work that we're really moving at CSSP. We've been able, again, Perigy's been incredibly helpful to get us seed dollars to get started. We created at CSSP a coordinating hub and have brought together partners. Now we have a national network of almost 45 to 50 national stakeholders who represent networks focused in this work. We've just established a 60-member early relational family network collaborative that is providing consultation to all everything that we're doing, because parent leadership is in the lead of this relational health work. We are partnering deep into communities, not in terms of finding paths to create community systems change, partnering again deep with families, learning together about well-being. And then we've galvanized all major organizations that are concerned about early childhood, and these members partner with us quarterly in terms of this early relational health movement, in terms of finding together the strategies of moving this work forward. We just last month initiated a collective impact initiative, building an emerging common agenda. More children and families experience early relational health and emotional connection. We're going after population-based impacts. We're starting to develop work groups that not only an early relational health research work group, we have a parent leadership work group that's helping inform all of our common agenda development. We have the beginning of workforce development and change. That's part of which led through the Reach Out and Read networks, but now with the doula networks. And we're hopeful to partner with a chapter here in terms of bringing early relational health training into the community health worker development for the medical home. So there's a movement going on in this good work. Our strategies are about to move this early relational health activity means parents are in the lead. We're listening deeply to parent voice and experience of what matters to them. We know the work is place-based. Pierce County is one example. I think there are other communities in Washington that are really thinking together about how do we move upstream. We're looking at building resources. We have cross-sector workforce development around relational health, helping at the National Reach Out and Read network. We're trying to bring that into the Northwest Reach Out and Read organization, and we are working to build the curriculum training in the doula networks, in home visiting. We're developing a measurement strategy. We have some tools that are emergent for that work. We've been pushing hard on policy. We're able to create a sign-on letter that was sent into the Senate Ways and Means, the Senate Finance Committee and the Health Committee, and also to the House Ways and Means Committee, about as they are building the mental health dollar investments, we're saying you've got to have prevention dollars for relational health moving forward. So we're trying to push an advocacy agenda, and all of this builds on the criticalness of messaging strategy. We have our policy goals we've put together that we could talk about another time. And it all also is trying to capture what's been learned about the evolutionary knowledge of human development. Says that the earliest experiences matter. Not only of soothing perinatal experiences, why the doula supports and some of the midwifery movement and some of the efforts to transform the birthing experience, but also prolonged breastfeeding and the sense of touch and movement and this clear responsive relationships and play, but also multiple social networks. This is knowledge that's been in the indigenous communities, in cross-cultural first world and second world communities, and has been true of the development of human species forever. And then you ask yourself the question of the disruptors that are now happening that don't allow those characteristics to be present, and ask yourself about the population-based issues we have of mental health disturbances, social emotional weaknesses, work ethic losses, and the like. We're pointing to what's required in human development in a public health prevention promotion sense that is essential. I'm going to close with a couple.
I actually believe that children develop parents as much as parents develop children. And any of us that have had kids know that that journey is a pact. I mean, we're on a journey with them and they pull from us what they need. And we have to be responsive and reactive, and we contribute a bit. That's, and so I absolutely believe in that mindset that it's a journey together with their child. The second thing I would add is, I also think that the wisdom that goes generationally also is a part of that journey, the wisdom of many. And no parent is perfect, nor do they need to be. And no one parent is responsible for the healthy future development of their child, because it's far more complex than that. But the journey of the multiple relationships are a part of assuring well-being. So that's why culture, that's why I think networks of people surrounding young families is a part of the resiliency strategy that captures healing, recovery, and optimal growth and development. That's how I think cultures have evolved to create who we all are now. It was not one little dyadic experience. It was the collective wisdom, and that was brought to the next generation, either directly or indirectly. And there's a lot of indirect human development that happens when we provide the opportunities for children to grow and thrive from the people that are around them.
We're very fortunate in pediatrics to know that. We're very fortunate in pediatrics to believe the depth of our soul that every family wants better for their child than themselves. We know, though, that there are many interferers, hence our advocacy positions, but also acknowledging our belief in every family has a potential and a capacity. Stan Greenspan, who inspired me now 20 years ago, and then Barry Brazelton, who inspired me during my residency time. I remember distinctly his comment to a large group of that were gathered in Portland, 600, 700 people listening to Brazelton. Is at the very beginning of that journey of touch points. His comment that said, you know, every family who comes to see us in pediatrics ought to leave with a greater sense of their well-being and their capacity. That mindset that we have shared with families about their well-being relationally, and the conversations that we can open about their dreams and their hopes relationally for their child is transformative for families, is transformative for our practices. And that's the opportunity of discovery in front of us. So those are my thoughts, which I'm really thankful to share with you, but most important, I'm eager to have a conversation. And I would like to, I'm going to put in the chat the core story, because we should all look at that in just a moment. But I'll stop now and open it up for comments, for questions, and reactions to all of this.
Thank you. That was great. I just had a question. So I know as pediatricians and people that care for kids, we all realize the importance of relational health. And there are ways with Reach Out and Read and other things we do in clinic to try to sort of instill that on parents. But do you have any other quick tips for kind of how we can talk about it with parents, or maybe give them some constructive guidance in the exam room when we might notice that they don't have that, you know, eye contact or responsiveness or things like that?
One of the, there's a lot to learn there. Okay. Secondly, the mindset matters. What's my mindset of a family's strong desire to be relationally successful too? Thirdly, what's my role in support of their capacities? So my mindset, and it's not always telling as much as it's helping families discover. One of the important messages from some of the work that we're learning, that we have now from Nurture Sciences Center, says that if one encourages every day that mamas and babies have, fathers and babies, caregivers and babies, have eye contact moments, intentional moments of eye contact and engagement, there's a power of connection that happens beyond itself. It's almost instinctive. What happens sometimes is people don't track that, or don't have enough time to do it, or don't think it's valuable. And there's some really powerful work that shows that if there's an attention in the dyad, no matter what the history of the parent is, to moments of shared eye contact and connectedness, 3 times a day, 3 minutes, there's a power that begins to create the connections and, I would argue, healing processes. Secondly, there are some families who are discovering when you ask them to do that, they'll want to tell you a story of how hard it was for them to have any connection, any relationships. Then you have the opportunity to say, let's keep talking about that, or I have some people in my clinic that you could talk with. So before you jump to a referral, you support their eagerness to learn. The other thing we're learning from our work in Michigan with the early relational health screen and video feedback with families, where in the Healthy Steps model, where the Healthy Steps specialist offers to make a movie with families coming in 20 minutes before the visit, make a little video movie about you and your baby interacting, turn the camera around, turn the iPhone or the iPad around and let families see themselves, and ask them what's the most precious moment to them? That activity alone promotes reflective processes for families, and over time then followed, families' sense of having stronger social emotional development with their children grows because of the reflective stance that was awakened, and that you cared about it, that you were very interested in the relational context. You know, I don't think it's a simple do this solution. I think it's a journey. And one of the papers in the Infant Mental Health Journal, I'm happy to share it also, it talks about sitting at the feet of the storyteller. That's the power of your relationship, wanting to hear the dreams and the wishes of their relationship with their child in a brief opening dialogue. Nothing more, because it cements the relationship, and then you can be in a better position to offer supports as families ask for it. So the mindset shift of building a relationship that's co-equal, that cares about the relational patterns, opens up then families being more open to receive either additional services or to share more with you, or for you to pass the need of supports to others. So as we go down this journey of community health workers joining our teams and the role they're going to play strongly with partnering with families, we've got an opportunity to open a relational health space within the medical home and the team-based care models in a way that we haven't had before. So I hope that, but again, in that space, there's a lot for all of us to discover.
David, it's just like, wow, there's so many things. This is a symphony. And I'm looking at Catherine right now because Catherine I'm so fortunate to work with her. She's one of our behavioral health care managers in the collaborative care model. And Catherine carries with her the stories, just these kind of stories, like what happens when she's meeting with the parents of 4 and 5-year-olds. Catherine, can I put you on the spot for a second just to reflect on that?
Of course you can, Dr. Woodruff. I mean, yeah, everything I feel like I've heard this evening aligns really well with the work that we are doing. I think in collaborative care, particularly, like you said, with those 4, 5, 6-year-olds, and working with specifically parents, right? We hear from parents in, the pediatric setting about all the behavior problems that they're experiencing. And it can feel like a really long list of behavior problems. And the first thing that we teach is just quality one-on-one time for 15 minutes a day. And it's hard. It's really hard for some families to make that happen. Trying to find, we talk a lot about overcoming barriers, and making a plan, and just, why is this worth it? And families, I think, have thrived with it, honestly. Being able to remember that they enjoy spending time with their kids and that they have fun together has been really, I think, powerful and helpful for making other changes, and leveraging that relationship to help their kids thrive has been really helpful, I think. But
Catherine, that's such a good reminder, and that's fabulous, fabulous work. And we in pediatrics watch, unfortunately, the development of what become preschool developmental problems and relationship problems and behavioral problems. They don't appear out of nowhere. They develop. They develop actually quite early. And so the patterns of temper tantrums, separation anxiety reactions, difficulty with sleep, toilet training issues, difficulty with eating, you all know that story. Those are actually relational patterns. So then you start asking yourself, now how did they get to that point? Then you start discovering, of course, there's other stressors, and how often the relationship itself is so strained, they don't know how to repair. And how many of you have discovered that sometimes the most important first intervention is to create connecting space. with young children. When, you know, a family comes home after work, that the parent sits down on the floor and gives undivided attention and eye contact for the resilient recovery of the separation response. I believe deeply that what so many of the early childhood relational and behavioral patterns are actually hidden separation issues that have been heretofore talked about as behavioral issues, missing the separation response and the reunion responses and the separation repair processes that are fundamental to building affective regulation states, which is all about relational patterns. You don't learn to regulate an emotional feeling. A child does not learn to regulate an emotional feeling unless there's co-regulation first with someone that cares about them. That's all the circle of security work. Look deeply at circle of security because it talks about co-regulation of every emotional state is what develops individual self-regulation. I believe culturally we got that backwards. We think the children have to self-regulate before they first co-regulate. So the patterns that that comes out of promoting first relationships, the work comes out of infant mental health, the work that comes out of the circle of security parenting, all of that is about co-regulation first to build strength, to which then self-regulation skills develop. And so many young kids are just struggling with not having those capacities because there's not been enough practice time on one hand, or there's a myth that they ought to be able to do it in time out, forgive me, that the myths of separation, individuation have gotten way ahead of emotional connection and connectedness, which is how resiliency capacities are built.
That is so profound. And I have so many thoughts at once. But one is, David, like having like some of those videos, I can just imagine showing those to community health workers that as we start that process and having that and just having a dialogue with them to say, what do you see? I mean, can that be part of what our training is like?
Absolutely. In fact, I mean, just today, Nikki Sherman and I sat with some of the researchers at Columbia University in nursery science, who now have 500 to 600 in-home dyadic video relational ready available training tapes. And we started going through a series of them. And I mean, I can almost weep because you can see when the relational patterns are strong and you can see when they're struggling. And certainly beyond the awareness at times of families themselves. But when one starts to open up the observational pattern of eye contact, shared affect, and those moments of emotional connection that start with preemies, but they are ever more strongly in those first 2 months, 3 months, 4 months of age, that when those are solidly built, that becomes a trait of the relationship for separation and reunion. It becomes a trait for co-regulation. And we've got a lot of work to have the predictive validity out of those observations, but there is research evidence that gives demonstration of that. To be able to share that kind of reflective space of, let's look at from the relational lens at all these variations of the theme and how we begin to strengthen those efforts. We think that can really start helping us improve ages and stages screening, improved 18-month social emotional well-being measured by ASQSE. We really think that there are pieces of evidence to say that that's true out of the research community, but how do we bring that into primary care and test it in the development of addressing the public health crisis in front of us? We get that incredible luxury in pediatrics to see children over time. You know child well-being in a year. You know child well-being in 18 months. You can see it. How do we be very intentional about carefully watching the relational patterns and using our team-based models and now our community health workers and our screening identification to be intentionally more targeted, that targeted universalism approach. Not every family needs all this. You can see the strength, but in families that need supports, be very intentional about attending to the relational context. That's what's moving.
David, I was excited to hear about kind of the bright futures transformation. And I was just wondering if maybe this is because I've been in clinic all day today, but just sort of as we're talking about this like paradigm shift and relooking at what we're doing, it feels like it's sort of just still being added on to like the old way of doing visits. And like my template note today for like a newborn has like, do you have a working fire extinguisher? And like, you know, just sort of like the bright futures list and just the other things that in addition to time and value-based payment, but just sort of like shifting what we actually do in the visit so that it's sort of like my template note is more like watching that beautiful moment or what did the family tell me, and less about like pee and poop and all this stuff about fire extinguishers. So yes, in addition to just like venting about the day, I guess just are there like conversations about like what are we doing that doesn't make sense anymore for families and that maybe is harmful or is undermining like the actual beauty of what we could be doing during the visit, in addition to what other team members are adding and kind of contributing.
Well, Abigail, you know, you understand disruptive leadership, right? And there are, you know, the standard processes of bright futures, you know, at its inception was really important. But when the relational health space is opening up as it is, what are we going to let go to get? And I actually think that team-based care models and some of the, I think Washington State has a unique opportunity because of, first of all, your leaders. Secondly, to have some of these conversations at higher levels about waiver opportunities. Thirdly, nobody's really doing bright future recommendations, let's be clear. And what do we focus on? You know, the bright futures journey is a long one. That's so politicized, but it's going to take champions that are disruptive to new ways of doing things clinically that we can raise up. You know, it's a strategy journey that is emergent. I hope I'm around long enough to see it change, but there are many voices that I hear that are asking that question, Abigail, about, you know, when we move into team-based care approaches, what's our role as pediatricians? What's the community health worker's role? What's the doula's role? What's the navigator's role? What do I need to focus on as a pediatrician? What can I give to my team members? Still hold it within an envisioned larger medical home coordinated with the community. How do I start using the home visitors to expand my strategies? What's the role of telemedicine, telehealth in terms of well-child visits and parenting? These are, it's an opening landscape right now for new ways of doing things. And think about the power of centering parenting models where you do team-based well-child care. That is a disruptive approach. Evidence is strong. Acceptability and equity is powerful. What are the barriers? We are. Payment structures are there now, and families love it. You can focus deeply relationally. You can still do well-child care. That's a disruptive transformation that can still all be within Bright Futures recommendations, but it shifts the whole way that we've been in sludge for my whole career in terms of knowing we've got to move into a way that's much more sound to relational need, to promotion, to prevention, and that kind of work. I think Jersey is opening up by some funders through the Burke Foundation, investing almost $8 million, $10 million into moving in medical homes, increasingly centering parenting models in FQHCs, but into clinics that are ready, providing the dollars in order to be able to do so. I think that's disruptive transformation, and you don't lose anything. You can do more. That's one strategy. The work that's going on in Washington State with co-locating community health workers, this has to be defined as to how we're going to use them effectively, and demonstrating the benefit of having done so into how it moves practice change. So, I mean, I think it's an emergent innovation space, but I think you're right to ask those hard questions. And if we really believe that relational health drives well-being outcomes, which I absolutely believe in, and if you believe that strong social networks counter adversity, which I also believe, and if we also believe that every family, no matter what their history of experience is, when you have authentic conversation about what their hopes and dreams are, despite their histories that they can now tell us with impunity, that being the source of new trajectories for well-being, that's in front of us. And if you watch and learn from the Harlem Children's Zone work, if any of you know that work, that inspired me. Jeff Kennedy inspired me 25 years ago, because he basically, by vision and community organizing, created baby colleges, right? Where women come together and talk, and these are poor women, come together with their grandmothers and their church ladies, basically to help these young mothers discover their capacities. Then they rolled that early education work into stronger preschool experiences. Then they strengthened the schools in these small communities with ongoing community support and the belief that all of their children could thrive and develop by intentionality of a community belief. And Jeff Kennedy now says clearly, and the data is clear, 95 to 98% of the children that went through the baby colleges in the zone are now in college. That's Harlem. My point is that intentionality with relational intensity within everything we know to counter isolation is the opportunity in front of us. And so community organizing with dualist community health workers and in our clinic operations is, I think, the opportunity in front of us. And we're a platform. Our health system's a platform for connection. We don't have to do it all. There's a lot of people out there that want us to be able to help support the platform success. And we just have to set the platform of hope and the platform of linking. And there's a lot of additional relational supports out there in the community that can really help.
And use our platform of advocacy.
Oh, yes.
And seed some of that, a lot of that, to others, to bring them to the table that don't get to do that.
Yeah. Our loudest advocacy message right now is child tax credit. We all saw the power of reducing poverty to decrease family stress and to increase child well-being. Straight at it. Poverty is such a driver of relational failure because of the stress it creates at every level, right? Housing, food, having to work, right? And just stressed out paying the bills. And where do the kids go? Who cares for the kids? They're in often, despite everybody's best effort, they're not always with strong relational environments. And this is a public statement. I don't believe in infant childcare. Quadruplets developmentally don't do well. One caregiver to 4 infants, the needs are not effectively met. We know that. That's policy. And so thinking about how do we build relational environments, probably multi-age group, if not probably ways in which first 6 months or a year are well protected relationally, Because once a child starts walking, they're engaging the world in their own way. They're making their relational environments. Whereas children under 6 months, dependent upon the relational environment coming to them. Does that make sense? Developmentally. And those kind of structures we have to really rethink about in the way that we help communities organize. You got me off on a tangent, but I just think there's so much opportunity right now on what we know. And we as pediatricians carrying the knowledge and asking the hard questions and harnessing the data of the progress of well-being or not, and really thinking deeply about the forces that are not allowing families to do well and articulating them and making them visible. That's our advocacy role. Rather than how many years all of us run our hands worrying about child development and witnessing it, but not being able to move it enough. And I think that's a different time now. Mary Ann, it's the top of the hour.
Yeah. I don't want to quit talking about this, and we won't. And I think this is, as you put it so well, David, it's part of the learning journey, and then learning together. And like, where do we go? To Abby's question, to yours, Emily, like, how do we do that? And I think it's learning together and discussing this.
Mary Ann, your leadership with the PSP agenda of deeply bringing in family experience and elevating the power of family voice to guide us, I think is a political strategy, because then you get them talking about what they need of us. And when we do it well, sharing what we are doing well that meets their needs. I think that's an appetite of opportunity to be further discovered.
It's the most exciting to really listen and engage and just be open to hearing. It's what is this experience like for others? Because we all have our own when we are in health settings, and we can all say pretty easily like what works for us and what doesn't, and what is that like for families, and how are we welcoming to everyone? This is the moment, David.
Well, and it takes teams of people, right back to that slide I had about gathering.
I love that book.
I do, yeah.
I can't believe, like, okay. I love that.
But the sense of collectively, let's figure it out together. Let's have the Washington Early Childhood Committee be adventuresome, take care of each other, find the advocacy roles we need, but also, you know, how do we galvanize through the chapter investments that allow us to test new things, like just happened with the community health worker movement from the first year families. That's a really big deal. And there is further work to be done. If we start embracing how we would incorporate doula knowledge into our experiences, doula home visiting, in terms of cracking the nut between the perinatal space, and the prenatal, perinatal, and community space with doula home visiting as an approach. I mean, how would we use that in our goals of family well-being and relational health well-being? I think those are exciting moments.
Well, I think we have a lot to think about before our next meeting, which will be in August. I'll send out, I don't have my calendar right here. When we'll all talk about different things we're working on, I think it's a great opportunity to think about, do we want to do some shared readings? Like, I just keep reading over and over again Tom Boyce's work and Andy Garner's. Those papers are huge, and there's just more to them every time. Every time you look at them, there's some other nugget of information about really what we're trying to do. And I would love to be in conversation about that, if that would be helpful. Oh, thank you, Emily. Our next meeting is Wednesday, August 3rd. But I would love to have feedback about what does intrigue people. What else would you like to talk about in this space? Because I think now we have this opportunity to take this discussion to really make it ours and be adventuresome, as David's saying.
So I put the Infant Mental Health Journal paper about being at the foot of the storyteller, and then the other is the core story. I welcome people's reaction or usage or testing of the core story with families or your friends or your colleagues, because we're in that journey of communication for the movement making element of this work, because it takes all of us together, not one sector, but rather multiple sectors working to make a relational focused effort, policy change, practice change, community change.
We may have done it last time, David, but I also think Shore's paper that is really challenging about just flipping the model of wellness care, about what that can look like.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll attach that one too when we send out.
Great.
Um,
I would hope we could keep conversation going, ground me in what's real, because I get way out there heady. But what's real? What can be done tomorrow?
what's real is what Abby did today. Like looking at those kids, I think about 2-year-old twins I saw yesterday when it was just joy the entire time. Like I could just cry because the whole time we're just going back and forth, and these little guys are just being loved and appreciated, and we're talking about this journey, and it's amazing.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. Be well all. See you in August.